Okay, let's bring you some analysis on what we can expect from this year's UN General Assembly by bringing in Professor Scott Lucas. He's joining us from Birmingham in the UK, and he's a Professor of International Politics at Birmingham University. Professor Lucas, always good to speak with you. So it's that time of year again, the UN General Assembly. Just first off, what are you expecting, if anything, to come out of this talking shop? Hopefully not a super spreader event.
No, let's leave aside a super spreader event, but talk about whether this is going to be simply national posturing or actually a genuine attempt at dealing with transnational and international critical issues like coronavirus. So, for example, will we see an effort from the UN General Assembly to try to get coronavirus vaccines not just to the developed countries of the world, but to lower income countries who have received only 1% of the vaccine so far? What can we do to contain coronavirus when its outbreak in one country affects all of us? And then, of course, there's the climate change issue. Will we see leaders genuinely set aside national posturing and their rivalries for an essential collective effort that is needed now, not at next year's UN General Assembly, not at the one 5 years from now, but now to get a true international effort, which includes developed countries, but also assistance to developing countries that they can continue to progress without threatening the planet? And I have to say, and I'm happy to take this country by country, I'm not sure which the answer is, whether we get the genuine action needed or the national posing.
Yeah, absolutely right. And it, not to be too hyperbolic, but this comes at a really crucial time for the United Nations as an organisation. You mentioned those two intranational issues that we're all facing. We're all in these things together. So it's time for a body like the UN to be able to do what it is assigned to do. But can it? There's been many calls over the years for it to be reconstituted, reinvigorated. Is this now the time for the UN to look at itself and try and set itself up going forward for the next 10, 15 years?
Well, I think in some ways the UN does the work that we need, but doesn't necessarily make headlines because it's at the level of working organizations. Think about something like UNESCO for scientific and cultural advancement, educational advancement. Think about the World Health Organization, which has been so essential during this pandemic. Think indeed about the fact that the UN has made these efforts for climate change despite all the problems we have at national level, trying to bring scientists together, trying to lead from scientific advice to effective action. So that happens on a day-to-day basis. But when we get to UN General Assembly this time of year, we don't see that work. We see national leaders making their speeches. And of course, at the end of the day, the UN is only as effective as national governments will be in contributing to a collective effort and not just simply an America first or a China first or a Russia first effort. And that's why I have to say that it is easy to kick the UN and it's easy to say, let's reform the UN. That's not the issue here. The issue is here not only in September at this General Assembly, but then in November at the Climate Change Summit in Glasgow in Scotland. Do we actually see action which is taken, even if it means that some of your national interest, say your fossil fuel industries, say your efforts at expanding infrastructure rapidly, have to be recalibrated because the fate of the planet is perhaps a greater interest.
Yeah, and it certainly is a greater interest, and all of those natural interests, or should be, Professor Lucas. And finally, then, you mentioned COP26, and I guess that is the moment that everyone is focusing on. Will you think meetings at the UNGA right now be leading up to the moment when world leaders make those announcements that perhaps you are calling for? Will this just be a chance for them to kind of hash out any disagreements before we get to COP, so that COP is just a chance for them to sign things off?
Those meetings will take place at working level. You know, beyond the national leaders as they make their speeches, at working level, we'll be seeing delegations work in terms of what might be possible, including can we get up to $100 billion, that commitment, that goal for helping developing nations. But at the highest level, does British Prime Minister Boris Johnson genuinely contribute to those efforts or thump his chest and say, we are a global Britain because he's facing Brexit problems? Does Scott Morrison, who you just talked about from Australia, does he talk about climate change in a meaningful way, or does he prefer to talk about nuclear submarines? And do the US and China stop talking about confronting each other and being the alpha male in the room and actually realize they have to work together and not separately if we have any hope of dealing with this crisis?
You're exactly right. Okay, Professor Scott Lucas from Birmingham University. Let's have you back in a couple of days so we can see what was said at the UNGA. Thank you.